The prairie was quiet that morning. Wind moved across the grass like a whisper, stirring dust around the lonely ranch house. Inside, the man had been alone for too many years. His name was Elias. He rose before dawn, fed the horses, carried water, and mended what needed mending. Each day was the same: work, silence, and the weight of empty rooms. But today was different. Today he expected company. He had written to the town's boarding house weeks ago. "Send me a cook," the letter said. Nothing more. He didn't care who. He only wanted someone who could keep the stove hot, bread on the table, and perhaps silence the echo in his halls. The answer came quickly. Someone would arrive on the stagecoach, a woman, so Elias waited. He did not wait at the road. He waited in his kitchen, sitting at the worn oak table, the ticking clock the only sound. He told himself it was no great matter. Just a cook. Nothing more. But when the knock came at his door, sharp and sudden, something in him jolted. He stood, straightened his shirt, and opened it. There she was, a woman in a white dress torn at the hem, dust on her shoes. Her hair was tangled by the wind, her cheeks red from the cold. She clutched a small bundle in her arms as if she had run a great distance, and there, smeared across her hands, was flour. For a moment neither spoke. He had expected someone plain, maybe older, maybe quiet. Not this, not a bride, her gown still holding the echo of a wedding march. Her voice broke the silence. "Are you Elias?" He nodded. His eyes caught on the flour, the dress, the tremor in her breathing. "I was told you needed a cook," she said, steadying herself against the doorframe. "I can cook." The words were simple, but her tone carried something heavier. It wasn't just an offer. It was a plea. Elias hesitated. He had lived long enough to know when someone was hiding a truth. She was no ordinary hire, no simple hand from town. She carried secrets like stones in her pocket. Still, he stepped aside. "Come in." She entered, moving like someone half afraid, half relieved to be let through the threshold. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and coffee, the table bare but waiting. She set her bundle down, just a satchel worn at the edges, and glanced around the room as if it were a safe harbor she hadn't expected to find. Elias watched her. He thought of the letter he had written, of how small his request had been. A cook, nothing more. Yet here stood a woman whose story clung to her like dust on her hem. "Your name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the risk of speaking it. Then, "Clara." The sound of it lingered in the room. He nodded once, though suspicion tightened his chest. Something about her eyes, about the way her fingers clutched the satchel, told him she had left something behind. And perhaps someone would come looking. Still, he pointed to the stove. "If you can cook, the kitchen is yours." She exhaled softly, as if she had been holding her breath for miles. Then, without a word, she moved toward the stove, lifting the iron pot to check the fire. Elias sat again at the table, watching her hands steady themselves in the work. The silence stretched, but it was no longer empty. It was the silence of two lives colliding. The beginning of something neither had asked for, yet both somehow needed. Outside, the prairie wind swept over the house, carrying away the old day and ushering in the new. The fire hissed as Clara placed fresh wood inside the stove. The sound filled the kitchen, breaking the old stillness that had lived there for years. Elias kept his eyes on her hands, quick, nervous, but sure enough to know where to place the pot, how to stir without wasting motion. She did not ask where things were kept. She opened cupboards, found flour, salt, and coffee grounds. It was as though she had done this 100 times before. Yet her dress, with its lace sleeves and frayed edges, made the sight almost strange, a bride working over a rancher's stove. Elias leaned back in his chair. "You've cooked in kitchens before." Her shoulders stiffened, then eased. "Yes, enough to keep a house fed." Her answer was short, guarded. He could tell she did not want questions. Still, silence carried its own weight. "What happened to the dress?" His voice was quiet but steady. She did not turn. "It's just cloth. It caught on thorns along the way." Elias knew there was more, but he did not press. On the prairie, a person's secrets belonged to them until they were ready to speak. The smell of bread rose as Clara worked the dough with steady hands. She moved with determination, as if putting herself into the task could drown the storm inside her. Her lips pressed tight. Now and then, she brushed loose hair from her face, leaving streaks of flour on her cheek. Elias studied the scene, and something stirred in him that he had not felt in years. Not desire, not yet, but the hum of life returning to a place that had grown too quiet. The clatter of pots, the soft hum she did not know escaped her throat. Even the mess of flour dusting the table. These things made the air feel different. He cleared his throat. How long do you plan to stay? She paused, her hand still in the dough. For a moment she didn't answer. Then softly, as long as you'll let me. The words dropped heavily between them. Elias looked at her, but she kept her eyes on the dough. He thought of his empty rooms, the way silence had been his only companion for years. And he thought of her standing there in a torn wedding dress, asking without asking for a place to rest. You can stay, he said finally. Her shoulders dropped with relief, though she did not turn to show it. She only kept kneading, working the bread until her arms trembled. The sun climbed higher outside, sending light through the window. Dust motes turned golden in the beams. For the first time in years, Elias felt the weight of time shift. Something had begun, though he could not yet name it. When the bread went into the oven, Clara washed her hands in the basin. The water turned cloudy, the flour and dirt washing away. She caught her reflection in the glass of the window. Hair tangled, dress torn, face pale. She touched the lace at her sleeve, then let it fall. Elias rose, his chair scraping the floor. He took his hat from the peg. I'll check the horses. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Outside he stood in the yard and drew a long breath. The air was crisp, the sky wide. Yet inside the house he had left a storm he could not see through. Who was Clara? Why had she come to him? To this lonely house wearing a gown meant for vows she had not spoken. He tightened his grip on the hat, his jaw set. Whatever her story was, it would come. Secrets always did. But for now there was bread in the oven and laughter waiting in the distance of days yet to come. The smell of baking bread drifted through the house, warm and steady, filling corners long untouched by comfort. Elias returned from the barn, brushing dust from his sleeves. Clara stood at the table, her hands busy again, this time peeling potatoes with quick, practiced strokes. He paused at the doorway, watching her. She had traded silence for work, pouring herself into it as though each task might hold her together. Her movements were efficient, almost sharp, yet he noticed the way her breath slowed whenever she heard his footsteps. You've been busy, Elias said. She didn't look up. Idle hands make restless thoughts. Her words were simple, but they told more than she likely intended. Elias nodded and moved toward the stove. He lifted the kettle, poured water into a tin cup, and sat at the table. Steam curled upward, vanishing into the air between them. What brought you here? He asked at last. Her hand stilled, the knife resting against the potato. For a moment, the room was still except for the ticking clock. Then she resumed peeling, her voice quiet. The stagecoach dropped me near the road. Your letter was waiting at the boarding house. I came here, he studied her. It was not a lie, but it was not the truth either. There was something behind her words, something she would not give. Clara finished the last potato, set it in the bowl, and finally turned. Do you always question the people you hire? Elias met her gaze. Not always. Only when their dress looks like it belongs to a wedding and not a kitchen. Color rose to her cheeks. She opened her mouth, then shut it, returning to the table. The dress means nothing. But Elias knew better. Clothes carried stories. Dust carried journeys. And her eyes carried a storm that no plain cook should bear. The oven door creaked and Clara pulled out the bread. Its golden crust filled the room with the scent of promise. She set it on the table, steam rising. Elias broke a piece, handed half to her, and kept the other. They ate in silence, the bread still warm in their hands. It was the first meal shared between them. And though no words passed, it felt like an unspoken agreement. She would feed this house and he would not send her away. Later, when the dishes were washed and the bread was gone, Elias went to the porch. Clara followed, carrying her satchel. She set it beside her on the bench, holding it close, her fingers tracing the worn leather strap. The prairie stretched before them. Endless grass, endless sky. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding over the field. Clara's eyes followed it, then lowered, her voice barely above the wind. I left in a hurry, she said. Elias turned his head toward her. She didn't meet his gaze, only gripped the satchel tighter. That much I figured, he said. Her lips pressed thin. She seemed to fight with words, pulling them forward, then shoving them back again. In the end, she only whispered, I can't go back. Elias let the words hang, He knew better than to press. If she were running, the prairie had given her cover for now. Still, he felt the weight of it. A runaway hiding in his house. The wind picked up, tossing her hair across her face. She brushed it back, her hand trembling. For just a moment, her eyes met his. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Something like hope, though fragile as glass. Elias looked away, out at the horizon. His voice was low, steady. Then you'll stay, at least until you decide where to run next. Clara's shoulders eased, though the satchel never left her grip. She turned back toward the field, the light of evening softening across the grass. For now, the prairie held its secrets, but Elias knew the silence would not last. The days passed one after the other, marked by work and the quiet rhythm of two people learning how to share space. Clara rose early before the sun and set the fire on the stove. Elias found the smell of coffee waiting when he came in from the barn. Bread, beans, potatoes, sometimes stew, simple meals but warm and steady, and always made with a kind of fierce care. She moved quickly in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her dress still the same torn gown but hidden now beneath an apron. Elias never mentioned the dress again, though each time he saw it a question pressed at him. Who had she left behind in such a hurry? He kept his silence, though. Instead, he showed her where the well bucket was, how to patch the leaking roof, and how to latch the barn door against the wind. She listened, always watchful, as though every task was something that kept her from slipping back into whatever life she had fled. At first, they spoke little. His words were few, hers guarded. But the silence between them grew softer over time, not empty, not sharp, just space that held its own comfort. One evening, Clara burned the stew. The smoke curled thick from the pot, filling the kitchen with the bitter scent. She coughed, fanned the air, and cursed under her breath. Elias came in from outside, sniffed the air, and lifted the lid. He looked at her with one brow raised. She flushed. "It was fine a moment ago," she muttered. "Smells like the moment passed," he said. Her mouth dropped open, then curved into the faintest laugh. It was quick, unsteady, but it broke through her guarded mask. Elias, caught off guard, found himself smiling too, though it was small and brief. The meal that night was bread and butter, no stew. But it was eaten with lighter hearts. The prairie tested them soon after. A storm rolled in, dark clouds tumbling across the sky, wind shrieking through the eaves. Elias worked fast to tether the animals, his shirt soaked through with rain. Clara stood in the doorway holding a lantern, calling out whenever she saw a horse break against its rope. When he came in, dripping, the lantern light fell over his face, and for the first time she reached out, handing him a dry cloth, steadying his arm as he stripped off his soaked jacket. Their eyes met in that glow, the sound of rain hammering the roof above them. "Storms don't last," Elias said, his voice low. Her hand lingered for just a second longer than needed before she let go. "Some do," she whispered. That night the house shook with the fury of the storm. Elias lay awake in his room, listening to the wind batter the windows. He heard movement in the hall, the creak of a board, soft footsteps. He rose, opened his door. Clara stood there, hair loose, face pale in the lantern light. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. He stepped aside and they went to the kitchen. The fire still smoldered, casting a faint glow. She sat at the table, clutching her hands together. Elias poured her a cup of water and set it down. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm outside. Then she spoke, her voice fragile but clear. "I left on my wedding day." Elias froze. The words dropped between them like thunder. He watched her fingers twist together, her eyes fixed on the table. "I ran," she said. "Before the vows, before the ring. I couldn't do it, so I left, and I don't know if they are coming after me." The storm roared louder, shaking the walls. Elias leaned back, his jaw tight. At last the truth had stepped into the room, and it would not leave them unchanged. The storm outside raged, but inside Clara's words hung heavier than the thunder. Elias sat still, his hands resting on the table, his gaze fixed on her. She kept her eyes low, staring at her knotted fingers as though afraid of what she might see in his face. He broke the silence at last. "You ran from the altar." Her shoulders lifted, then dropped. "Yes, why?" She lifted her eyes just enough to meet his. The lantern glow caught the sorrow there. "Because it wasn't love. It wasn't a choice. It was an arrangement. Expectation. My family wanted it, he wanted it, but not me. I couldn't stand there and promise a life that wasn't mine." Her voice trembled. so I ran. And I kept running until I found your door." Elias leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight. His face was hard, unreadable. For years he had lived with silence, and now it seemed every word she spoke chipped at the walls around him. "You understand what that means?" he asked. "A man doesn't like being left at the altar. If he's the type to chase, he'll come." Clara's jaw tightened. "I know." Her voice carried both fear and defiance. She had chosen to flee, but part of her still braced for the footsteps that might follow. The storm outside began to ease, thunder rolling farther into the distance. Rain softened to a steady patter. In the kitchen, the fire hissed low, its glow softening across the floor. Elias finally spoke again. "If trouble comes, I'll face it. But I won't carry a stranger's fight on my shoulders. If you stay here, you'll need to be honest with me." Her hands tightened on the edge of the table. "I have been honest." Not all the way, his eyes narrowed. "You've told me what you left." "Not who you left." Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. She pressed them closed again, her throat working as she swallowed. For a long while she said nothing. Then softly, "His name is Matthew." The sound of it seemed to drain her. She exhaled slowly, almost as if saying it aloud made the fear more real. Elias gave a slow nod, his expression unchanged. "Matthew." Clara rose abruptly as though the weight of the kitchen was too much. She went to the window, staring into the rain-soaked dark. Her reflection wavered in the glass, pale and tired, framed by lightning flashes. Elias remained at the table, his voice low. "You'll need to decide, Clara, are you running from him or running toward something else?" She turned sharply, her eyes glistening. "I don't know." Her words came quickly, raw. "All I know is I couldn't marry him. I couldn't give my life to a man I didn't love. That was the only truth I had left." Her hands trembled as she held the edge of the window frame. "And maybe that makes me weak or selfish, but I'd rather be called that than live a lie." The fire cracked, the last of its coals falling in the hearth. Elias stood slowly, his boots sounding against the wooden floor. He crossed to the stove, dropped a log into the flames, and watched the sparks climb. "You'll find out what you're running toward in time," he said quietly. "The prairie doesn't keep secrets forever." Clara closed her eyes, her breath uneven. She turned back to the window, but her voice softened. "Maybe I'm tired of running." Elias didn't answer. He only let the fire catch, filling the room again with light. Outside, the storm faded into silence. But in that silence, something new had taken root. Fragile, unsteady, but alive. Morning came clear and sharp after the storm. The sky stretched wide, washed clean, the grass heavy with rain. Elias rose early, as he always did, tending the horses, checking the fences. Yet the house felt different now, carrying Clara's confession like an echo in the walls. When he stepped back inside, she was already at the stove. The scent of coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the sweet smell of fresh cornbread. She moved with a quiet determination, as if the storm had stripped her of hesitation. Elias set his hat on the peg. "You didn't sleep much." She glanced over her shoulder, brushing hair from her face. "Neither did you." He said nothing, only took a seat at the table. She set a plate before him, cornbread, beans, and a slice of cured ham. He nodded once in thanks. They ate in silence, the kind that felt less like distance and more like a truce. After the meal, Clara cleared the plates. She lingered at the sink, her hands still, her back to him. At last she spoke. "You think he'll come?" Elias leaned back in his chair. "If a man's pride was hurt and his bride ran, he'll want answers. Maybe worse." Clara gripped the edge of the basin, her knuckles white. "He's the kind who doesn't take no kindly." Elias studied her, his jaw set. "Then we'll be ready." Her head turned, eyes wide. "We?" He held her gaze. "You're under my roof. That makes it my concern." For a moment, her face softened as though she hadn't expected anyone to claim her trouble as their own. She turned back to the basin quickly, but her voice carried a thread of relief. "Thank you." The day stretched long. Elias worked in the barn, fixing a broken gate while Clara mended clothes on the porch. She hummed quietly, a tune faint and wavering. Elias paused now and then, listening without meaning to, surprised at how her voice carried peace into the yard. But peace rarely lasted on the prairie. Near sundown, as the sky burned orange and the shadows stretched long, a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust rose behind the horse, its outline growing sharper as it neared. Clara's needle froze mid-stitch. Elias stepped out from the barn, his body tense. The rider slowed as he reached the house, pulling the reins tight. A man dismounted, his boots sinking into the dirt. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed clean but worn from travel. His eyes swept the house, the porch, then fixed on Clara. Elias stepped forward. "Evening." The stranger tipped his hat, though his eyes did not leave Clara. "Evening. I'm looking for someone." Clara's breath caught. She set her sewing aside, her hands trembling. Elias noticed, but his face stayed calm. "Plenty of folks pass through," Elias said. "Who are you searching for?" The man's jaw tightened. "A woman." Clara rose. "She's mine." Clara rose slowly to her feet, her voice catching in her throat. "Matthew." The name fell heavy between them, more powerful than the fading sun. Elias turned his head slightly, studying Clara, then the man. The tension tightened like a rope pulled too hard. Matthew's eyes narrowed. "You've been hiding here?" Clara's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "I wasn't hiding. I was leaving." The wind shifted, carrying the weight of what was to come. Elias stood firm, his hand resting lightly on his belt. Not near his gun, but close enough to show he would not yield easily. The prairie was no longer quiet. It braced itself for a storm of another kind. The yard fell into silence. The only sound was the horse pawing at the dirt, snorting against the tension in the air. Matthew's eyes burned, locked on Clara as though Elias wasn't even there. "You walked away," Matthew said, his voice low but sharp. "Left me standing before the whole town like a fool." Clara steadied herself on the porch rail. "Because it wasn't right. I couldn't marry you." Matthew took a step forward. Elias shifted, blocking his path. His stance was calm but unyielding. "You've had your say," Elias told him. "Now turn your horse and go." Matthew's jaw clenched, his gaze flicking to Elias with disdain. "And who are you? Some hired hand she latched onto?" "This isn't your business." Elias didn't flinch. "She's here. That makes it mine." The words cut through the air like a blade. Clara looked between them, her chest rising and falling quickly, fear and courage warring in her eyes. Matthew spat on the ground, anger simmering. "You think you can keep her from me?" She promised herself. "I have her word, her family's word, the preacher's blessing. That's law enough." Clara's voice cracked, but she spoke firmly. "It's not law if my heart never gave it." Her words stopped Matthew for a breath. His face twisted, rage and disbelief colliding. He turned to her fully now, ignoring Elias. "You made me a mockery, Clara. Do you know what people said? That I couldn't hold my own bride. That I was weak." Her hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Strength isn't enforcing what isn't freely given." Elias studied her, quiet pride flickering in his eyes at her defiance. But he knew Matthew would not walk away easily. Matthew's voice dropped into a growl. "You think you'll start a new life out here? With him?" His gaze darted toward Elias. "This rancher won't protect you forever." "He can't." Elias's voice was steady, deep. "I don't need to protect her from choice." She made it. "You'd do well to respect it." The two men stood like stone, the weight of their words pressing into the dust between them. Clara's heart pounded, her hands gripping the porch rail as if to hold herself steady. Matthew laughed bitterly. "Respect? She shamed me. She belongs with me, and I'll drag her back if I have to." Elias stepped closer, his presence unshaken. "You'll do no such thing." Matthew's hand twitched near his belt, but Elias's eyes were iron, fixed and warning. The tension in the air grew sharp, as if even the wind dared not move. Then Clara's voice broke through, loud and clear. "Stop!" Both men turned to her. She stood tall now, her fear swallowed by resolve. "I don't belong to anyone. Not you, Matthew. Not him, not anyone. I belong to myself, and I choose to stay." The words struck with finality. The porch seemed to vibrate with the force of them. Matthew's mouth opened, then closed, his fury fighting against the truth he could not undo. Elias watched him carefully, ready if the man made a move. But Matthew only stood there, trembling with rage, his breath rough. "You'll regret this, Clara," he spat. He turned sharply, mounted his horse, and pulled the reins hard. The animal reared, then bolted, carrying him back into the horizon, dust rising in his wake. Clara's knees buckled. She sank to the step, covering her face with her hands. Elias remained standing, watching the rider vanish. Only when the dust settled did he finally turn to her. "He'll be back," Elias said quietly. Clara lowered her hands, her eyes red but shining. "Then let him come. Next time I won't run." The prairie grew quiet again after Matthew rode off. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold. Clara sat on the step, her breath still uneven, her hands trembling in her lap. Elias stood nearby, watching the horizon long after Matthew's figure had disappeared. At last Clara spoke, her voice soft but steady. "He won't give up so easily," Elias nodded. "No, a man like that carries pride like a weapon. He'll swing it until it breaks." She looked up at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "What if he brings others, my family? They wanted this match as much as he did." Elias's jaw tightened. He sat down beside her, the porch creaking beneath his weight. "Then you'll need to decide again. Not just to leave him, but to face whatever comes with that choice." Clara stared at her hands, then at the fields rolling endlessly before them. "I thought running would be enough. But running only carried the chain farther with me. I don't want to be chained anymore." Her words carried a strength Elias hadn't heard before. He studied her profile, the way her shoulders straightened, the way her eyes held the setting sun without blinking. Something inside him shifted, a quiet respect blooming where suspicion had once lived. That night Clara could not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a single lantern burning low, the flame flickering shadows across the walls. In front of her lay her satchel, worn leather frayed from travel. Slowly she opened it. Inside were small things. A ribbon, a letter sealed but never delivered, a book of psalms with her name scratched faintly inside the cover. She touched each object gently, as if weighing the life she had left behind against the unknown before her. Elias entered quietly, his footsteps steady on the floor. He poured himself water, then leaned against the doorway, watching her. "Those things from home?" She nodded. "Pieces of it. Pieces I couldn't leave." He studied her for a moment. "And yet you left everything larger." Clara smiled faintly, though sorrow lingered in her eyes. "Sometimes the small things matter most. They remind me I'm still myself, even if everything else changes." Elias didn't answer right away. He only watched her close the satchel and set it aside. Her hands lingered on the worn strap before pulling back. "Sleep," he said finally. "You'll need your strength." Clara rose, extinguishing the lantern. As she passed him, her sleeve brushed his hand, light as a whisper. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she continued down the hall, leaving Elias in the dim kitchen, staring at the place where her touch had been. The days that followed carried a new rhythm. Clara worked in the kitchen, but with a fire in her movements now. Not just survival. She laughed once when the bread puffed higher than she expected. She hummed more often, tunes soft and wistful. Elias noticed each change, though he never remarked on it, and yet beneath it all a shadow remained. Every sound of hooves in the distance made Clara pause. Every letter from town left Elias wondering if Matthew's hand had written it. The prairie air itself seemed charged, as though waiting for something to break. One evening, as the light faded, Clara stood on the ridge behind the house. Elias found her there, staring at the wide stretch of land. "You should be inside," he said. She shook her head, her hair catching the last of the sun. "No, I've hidden enough. If he comes back, I want to face him in the open sky." Her voice was calm, certain. Elias watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I'll stand with you," he said. Clara turned, her eyes glistening. Not with fear this time, but with something stronger. "Not for me," she whispered. "With me." And Elias understood. The prairie stretched wide and endless, but that evening felt tight, as if the land itself held its breath. Clara's words lingered in Elias's mind. Not for me, with me. He had spent years carrying silence, thinking it safer than hope. But now, standing beside her, he felt something stirring that was harder to ignore than hunger, sharper than loneliness. They went back to the house, the lanterns glowing softly against the dark. Supper was simple. Beans, bread, and a jar of peaches Clara had found tucked away in the cellar. She opened it carefully, spooning the fruit into 2 bowls. Elias ate slowly, his eyes drifting off into her face. When she caught him looking, she smiled, though faintly. "What is it?" He set his spoon down. "You're different these days." Her brow furrowed. "Different how?" "Less like someone who's running. More like someone who's planting her feet." Clara lowered her gaze, pushing the peach around her bowl. "Maybe I'm tired of the chase. Tired of being afraid." Elias leaned back, his voice low. "Fear doesn't leave easily, it clings. But sometimes it's worth fighting it off." She met his eyes again, and for a long moment they held each other's gaze. The air between them seemed to hum, carrying unspoken things neither dared to name. That night the wind carried a sound. Distant hooves. Faint but steady, Clara froze, her hands still going where she was folding cloth. Elias stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon. The moon hung high, spilling pale light over the grass. There, he muttered. A shadow moved against the land. Not one horse this time. 2, maybe 3. Clara joined him, her face pale in the moonlight. He's come back. Elias's jaw set. He stepped inside, pulling down the rifle that hung by the door. He checked it calmly as if it were nothing more than another day's work. Clara's voice shook. You'd fight for me? His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. No, I'd fight beside you. That's the difference, her breath caught. She nodded, her fear slowly shifting into resolve. Together they stood on the porch, the night air cool against their skin, the sound of hooves growing louder. The riders drew near. 3 figures on horseback, shadows against the moonlit prairie. At the front was Matthew, his shoulders squared, his posture proud and angry. Behind him 2 other men, strangers to Clara, but their stance made their purpose clear. The horses slowed as they reached the yard. Dust rose, catching in the light. Matthew swung down from his saddle, boots striking the dirt hard. You thought you could hide from me forever? His voice carried sharply through the night. Clara's voice rose before Elias could answer. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing, and I chose not to be yours. Matthew's eyes narrowed, fury flashing in them. You embarrassed me in front of the whole town. You think I'll let that stand? Elias stepped forward, the rifle steady in his hands, though he didn't raise it. His voice was calm, even. You've come far enough, Matthew sneered. And you think you'll stop me? Elias shook his head. No, she will. Clara's heart pounded, but she stepped forward down the porch steps. The earth felt solid beneath her bare feet, the night air sharp in her lungs. She faced Matthew head-on, no longer trembling. I will not go back with you, she said firmly. Not tonight, not ever. You may call me Runaway, coward, selfish, whatever name you choose, but I will not be your wife. My life is mine. The words rang out into the night, carried by the prairie wind. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Even the horses seemed to pause. Matthew's face darkened. You'll regret this. Clara stood taller, her eyes steady. No, for the first time I won't. Elias moved closer, standing just behind her shoulder, not shielding her, but beside her, exactly as she asked. And under the moon's silver light, the standoff began. The night was still. The only sound was the restless snort of the horses and the pounding of Clara's heart. She stood firm, her torn wedding dress catching the moonlight, her voice echoing in the silence she had once feared. Elias stood beside her, silent but steady, a wall of strength without chains. Matthew's face twisted, his pride wounded deeper than any cut. He stepped closer, fists tight, but Clara did not move. I gave you my answer, she said, and I won't give it again. Go back, Matthew. Find a life that is yours, not one you try to force on me. His jaw clenched. For a moment it seemed he might strike or worse. But then he saw Elias, calm, rifle resting loose in his hands, eyes sharp as steel. Elias did not threaten. He didn't need to. His presence said enough. If Matthew crossed that line, it would end badly. Matthew spat on the ground. You'll regret this day. Clara's voice held no tremor now. No, I'll remember it as the day I chose myself. The other 2 men shifted uneasily in their saddles. One muttered, Let it go, Matthew. She ain't coming back. Matthew glared at them, then at Clara, then at Elias. His pride fought hard, but even pride knew when it had lost ground. At last, with a sharp motion, he mounted his horse. Without another word, he yanked the reins, turned, and rode off into the dark. His men followed, their shapes swallowed by the wide prairie. The yard grew quiet again. Only the crickets sang, and the wind brushed softly against the grass. Clara let out a long breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her knees shook, but she didn't fall. She looked up at Elias. Thank you, she whispered. Elias shook his head. No thanks needed. You stood your ground. That was yours. Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with something brighter. Relief, freedom, a fragile hope taking its first breath. Inside the house, the lantern still burned low. They went back in, the door closing behind them, shutting out the night. Clara sank into a chair, her hands trembling less now. Elias poured her a cup of water and set it before her. You'll stay? He asked quietly. Clara looked at him, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "If you'll have me," his answer came without hesitation. "Not as a cook. Not as a stranger passing through. But ask yourself, stay for life." For the first time since she had stepped onto his porch, Clara laughed. It was soft at first, then stronger, warmer, filling the kitchen like music. Elias felt it settle deep inside him, breaking the silence he had lived with for too long. The two of them sat together, the fire glowing, the house no longer empty. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and endless, carrying away storms and shadows. Inside, something new had taken root, steady, quiet, and alive. He had asked for a cook. What he found was far more, and Clara, the runaway bride, had found not a hiding place, but a home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss the next tale. Share it with someone who loves frontier romance. Your support keeps these stories alive.